What does it look like when worlds collide in a game? Maybe it's Kingdom Hearts, or better yet, Super Smash Bros, or better still, what if it looked like this moment from D&D actual play series Dimension 20 Neverafter? How, though? This is a leering man with a handful of beads. Where are the worlds? In this video essay, we'll look at how the SOC model identifies game worlds, how players take on multiple roles within those worlds, and then discover how the SOC model makes this moment so mind-blowing. The SOC model was devised and developed by Stephen Conway and Andrew Trevillian as a concise, robust, and flexible framework for both game analysis and design. SOC stands for Social, Operative, Character. That is, the three fundamental realms of experience within any game event or play scenario. The base foundation is the social world. Play of any kind must begin from a real-world access point. A living room card table, a decked-out battle station, a local sports ground. It's not just a setting, but a context for play to build from. In this world, dice, whilst recognizable as a game object, have no concrete meaning or function. Until play is initiated, they are essentially random number generators. Above this, the operative world is where elements of play and/or game mechanics are given tangible importance. Scoring points, optimizing stats, leveling up. These concepts may be seen as trivial and made up in the social world, but in the operative world, these components matter more than anything. In this world, dice become the ultimate authority on many game outcomes. At the top sits the character world, the only game world that is technically optional in an instance of play. You don't need imagination or suspension of disbelief to play with a frisbee, but the character world is the main point of initial attraction for many players. It's the story, the aesthetic, the promise of escapism from the real world. In this world, dice cease to exist as objects, but their impact is more tangible than anything. Moving between game worlds is called keying, as in musical keys. If you want to move to another world, you need to be in tune with the key that world is playing in. While the analogy is intended to end there, let's see what more it can say about how different games involve different keying processes. A key is a group of notes unified by a tonic. Many musicians refer to the tonic as the feeling of home. A key change occurs when the tonic shifts, creating a new sense of home and assigning a different group of notes to match. Commonly, key changes involve moving up or down a semitone, the smallest distance in Western music. But while the distance is small, the effect is dramatic, because all notes in the key must change, which is why most songs relegate key changes to new sections or iterations. This could translate to sports, where there's a strict order of operations. In the operative world, players compete over the ball. Someone scores, and down keys to the social world by celebrating with their teammates, or up keys to character world by reveling in the crowd's cheers, only for the whistle to key them back to the operative world for another round. A key can also change by shuffling the relationship between notes. Many keys will have notes in common. C and G major have only one note different, so changing between them is less dramatic and more fluid. This is called modulation, often used in jazz where switching keys happens quickly and regularly. Modulation could translate to games where the relationship between game worlds is designed to be interwoven. In D&D, you can go from narrating a scene, to making a skill check, to role-playing, to cracking a joke, all in a short space of time. When looking at crossing boundaries, it's useful to flesh out the dimensions of each game world. Conway and Trevillian borrow from sociologist Erving Goffman the terms front stage and backstage. The front stage is where an actant behaves harmoniously with the world and its accepted context. a performance recognizable and agreeable to an audience. The backstage is where an actor can eschew their frontstage persona and comfortably prepare for future performance, and or recover from past performances. It is for rehearsal and conference with fellow actors. Conway has asserted that play is dependent upon the phrase "as if." Not only should the player behave as if the rules, mechanics, objects found within the operative and character worlds have equal or more value than in the social world, the player must also commit wholeheartedly to the fantasy-made reality, as if the numbers on the dice can mean life or death, as if their character strengths and weaknesses are their own, as if the DM is a god unquestioned. A player who fails to commit to this two-word phrase and all it implies threatens to forcibly downkey to the social world and end the play scenario for all involved. In the Meisner technique, developed by renowned acting teacher Sanford Meisner, "as if" is used as a guiding phrase for the process of particularization. Prior to performing, an actor must find a point of access for emotions required in the scene, essentially up-keying themselves to the operative world in a specific way so that their transitioning to the character world is as fluid as possible. Particularization comes in when the text covers subject matter that an actor may have no frame of reference for. For example, a scene may be about a boyfriend accusing his girlfriend of cheating on him with a woman. But if the actress involved identifies as straight and or has no prior experience of infidelity, she might play the part as if she was accused of dealing drugs or committing murder or any deadly secret with another woman. Some imaginary circumstance that prepares a true emotion for the actress to up-key into her character. In this way, "as if" reflects Meisner's core maxim about playing a part, living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. In her investigations of the Meisner technique through the lens of play theory, performing arts academic Hilary Halber zeroed in on the meta-communicative action and subjunctive mood of play, that is, the collision of real and imaginary. She states that in her explorations, the borders between experiencing and playing were precarious and in no way absolute. She argued that the Meisner technique is both paratelic and autotelic, meaning that play exists to serve play itself and the individual players simultaneously. By coordinating numerous roles within the shared experience, D&D exemplifies this idea of real and imaginary collision. In the social world, backstage players are an audience to the scenes they're not involved in, while frontstage players are commentators chiming in with jokes and banter. In the operative world, backstage players are committed RPG nerds, optimizing their stats, while frontstage players are strategists at a war table, describing each move in detail. And in the character world, backstage players are collaborative storytellers, narrating their arcs as well as building off fellow party members' stories, while frontstage players are fully immersed in a fantastical identity of their own creation. None of these roles are the same, and some even exist in opposition, but all ultimately serve each other and the game as a whole. In Dimension 20 Neverafter, failed charisma saves would grant the PCs a small blood-red token.
What's that? What the hell is that?
Hold on to that for me.
But DM Brennan Lee Mulligan made a point of not revealing the function or meaning of these tokens until the last couple sessions of the campaign. With the function unknown, players had no way of engaging with the tokens in the operative world. Without assigned meaning, the tokens effectively didn't exist in the character world, leaving only the social world where players could merely joke about the frustrating mystery beads.
Are we playing Mancala? Is there a side game where we play Mancala?
Unlike the tokens, Mulligan was more forthcoming about the ominous Baba Yaga, but seemingly as a means to obfuscate her nature.
There is no preparation you can make to anticipate what manner she will receive you in, nor what her goals or aims will be if she deigns to speak with you.
In the operative world, the Baba Yaga could only be seen as the highest hurdle before fighting the big bad. Her presence in the social world was largely owed to some PCs knowing her folklore, but she remained a dominant influence in the character world destined to be unleashed upon the players. Thus, the tokens and the Baba Yaga existed at the extremes of social and character worlds, until this moment.
All of you look up and see a giant stone pestle, like a huge stone bowl, and a leering, hideous face lean down and go, "What's this you carry with you?" And that's all for this episode of Dimension 20.
The Baba Yaga asserts her power over all game worlds by reaching from the character world into the social world and forcibly upkeying these enigmatic blood-red tokens into the cold light of play, only for Mulligan to end the session forcibly downkeying the players back to the social world and creating a whiplash that is felt throughout every game world.